That little flowered dress may have started out holding 100 pounds of chicken feed. Think on that a moment. Before it had a collar, before it had buttons, before a child wore it to church, that cloth may have sat in a feed store with grain dust on it and a meal label stitched or pasted across the front. And the woman who carried it home did not see an empty bag. She saw yardage she would not have to buy. Folks call them feed sacks now, but feed was only part of the story. Flour, sugar, seed, meal, and other dry goods came home in cotton bags too. Once the contents were used, that bag might become a dish towel, an apron, a curtain, a quilt back, a pair of drawers, or a dress neat enough for Sunday. The best of that sewing was no accident. A woman had to gather enough matching cloth, open the seams without wasting the edge, wash out the dust and smell, work around an old meal mark, lay out a pattern, and make a narrow piece of packaging behave like proper yard goods. First, let me show you the clues that separate real sackcloth from an ordinary old print. Then we will come back to the practical rule behind the whole custom, because it still works. The rule was not simply to save everything. It was to notice what a thing could become before somebody else called it waste. And there is one turn in this story that surprises most people. Farm women did not merely accept whatever cloth the mills gave them. Their choices helped change the bags themselves. The prints grew prettier, the labels became easier to remove. A sack of feed had to satisfy the chickens, but the empty sack had begun to answer to the woman who sewed. Come sit close to the stove. Let us look at how a feed bag found its way into a family's clothes press. Long before the bright little prints people remember, dry goods moved in barrels and in plain cloth bags. Through the 19th century and into the 20th, cotton commodity bags became common in rural trade. They were strong enough to carry what was sold, and after they were emptied, the cloth was too useful to throw away. That does not mean every family waited for a national fashion to tell them what to do. Reuse came first. The sales idea followed. The earliest sacks were often plain, unbleached cotton, with the mill name printed right on the cloth. Those marks could be stubborn. Some women bleached at them or placed them where they would not show. Sometimes the letters survived anyway, faint as a shadow under a quilt block or inside a garment. Mills learned from the complaints. Paper labels could be soaked away more easily than permanent ink. Then colored cloth and small repeated prints appeared more widely through the 1920s and 1930s. You cannot hang that whole change on one magic year. It happened by degrees. By the later 1930s and the 1940s, printed cotton sacks had become a serious selling feature. That changed the trip to the feed store. The content still mattered, of course, but so did the cloth. A household trying to gather enough of one print might need the next bag to match the first two. A husband sent for feed could come home with strict instructions about which flower, stripe, or color to bring back. Several bags were needed for a garment. One scholarly study says 300-pound grain sacks could make an average adult dress. Museum evidence shows that fuller patterns or smaller bags might take 5 or more. That difference matters. These were not standard bolts from a dry goods counter. A careful sewer planned around the width, the holes, the print, and every usable inch. And manufacturers noticed who was paying attention. They improved the cotton. They offered matching patterns. They hired designers. Some produced sewing booklets that showed what a family could make. The sack had become two products at once, It carried food or feed on the first trip, then offered cloth for the household after it was empty. People sometimes call that cloth free. It was not truly free because the family had paid for what came inside it. But it did provide fabric without a second purchase of yard goods. In a cash-poor household, that distinction could put shirts on children and curtains at a window. This practice belonged to rural America broadly, not to Appalachia alone. Still, the mountain record is clear enough that we do not have to lean on a made-up family tale. In the Library of Congress record for Roanoke, West Virginia, people interviewed in 1981 remembered children's clothing as nearly always homemade. Several recalled feed sacks being turned into clothes. The same community remembered quilting as shared work, with a frame set up where women could gather and help one another through a long day. Along the Blue Ridge, quilt documentation also records cotton animal feed sacks as a popular source of cloth in the 1930s and 1940s. Plain white sacks could be dyed. Worn clothing could be cut again. Scraps could move into a quilt. Nothing about that work was effortless, and none of it should be reduced to a sweet picture of old-time poverty. It took judgment. First came the emptying. Grain dust and feed smell had to be dealt with. A sack might be shaken outdoors, then soaked and laundered, sometimes more than once. The heavy string seam was picked open instead of cut away because cutting cost width. The cloth was pressed flat and examined in good light. Then came sorting. Was the weave sound? Had mice found it? Was there oil, mildew, or a stain that would not lift? Did another sack in the house match the print closely enough? Could the old label be hidden inside a hem, under a facing, or beneath a darker piece? The best use depended on the cloth. A coarse, plain bag might serve for a towel, mattress cover, lining, or quilt back. A softer percale print could become a blouse, a child's dress, an apron, pajamas, or curtains. Small remnants still had work in them. They became patches, pockets, quilt pieces, doll clothes, or ties. The word thrift can mislead us here. Thrift was not keeping a mountain of useless things. It was knowing the difference between material and clutter. A good piece of sackcloth was washable, strong, cuttable, and already paid for as part of a necessary purchase. A rotten piece was rotten. A stained chemical sack was not a prize. The wisdom was in the choosing. That last point matters today. Modern feed and seed packaging is not the same material, and any sack that held fertilizer, treated seed, chemicals, or unknown contents should not become clothing or food cloth. We can learn the old judgment without copying an unsafe material choice. Suppose somebody lays a faded floral quilt across your lap and says it was made from feed sacks. How would you know? Truth is, sometimes you cannot. Small cotton prints like those used for commodity bags were also sold as ordinary yardage. A 1930s looking flower does not prove the story. Family memory is valuable, but the cloth itself may offer stronger clues. The first clue is a surviving mark. On plain sacks, part of a mill name, weight, brand, or product label may remain. It might be bold, or it might be a gray ghost that bleaching never quite removed. Look on the back of a quilt, inside a seam, under a facing, or near a hem where the maker could hide it. The second clue is a line of holes. Commodity bags were closed with stout stitching and a large needle. When the seam was picked apart, That needle could leave a row of broken threads or enlarged holes near an edge. A careful maker might cut around them, turn them into a seam allowance, or place them where nobody would notice. If the holes remain in a finished piece, they can be more telling than the print. The third clue is the label area. Later printed sacks often carried a paper label meant to come off with soaking. A slight difference in fading, a patch of adhesive trace, or provenance from an intact label sack can help. It still takes caution. Age creates marks of its own. The fourth clue is the way the maker solved the narrow cloth. Look for piecing that seems unnecessary if wide yardage had been available. Look for matched panels, economical facings, narrow hems, or a print turned in a clever direction to gain a few inches. And the fifth clue is documented history. An object tied to a maker, a mill, a dated sewing contest, or an old photograph is stronger than an attractive story added many years later. Museums are careful about this for good reason. The everyday things were used hard. Towels wore thin. Underclothes disappeared. Dresses were cut down for a younger child, then became patches or quilt pieces. The most ordinary examples were often used until there was little left to save. So when a real sack seam or faded mill mark survives, it carries more than proof. It shows the route a piece of cloth traveled through a household. The feed sack story is often pinned entirely to the Great Depression. Hard times certainly made reusable cloth more valuable, but that is only part of the timeline. During the Second World War, factories and materials were redirected toward military needs. In 1942, the War Production Board limited the amount of fabric and certain construction details used in manufactured women's clothing. Commodity bags occupied a different place in the economy, and rural families already knew how to use them. That made sackcloth especially useful, but it did not turn every dress into a symbol or every farm woman into the same person. Some people remembered the cloth with affection. Some remembered the labor. Some children likely wished for store-bought clothes. Others wore a well-made printed dress with pride. We should leave room for all of that. The skill, though, is plain to see. Imagine laying 3 or 4 sacks on a table. One print is a shade darker because it came from another dye run. One has a stubborn mark. One has a weak place near the bottom. Your pattern asks for pieces wider than the cloth. There is no extra half yard waiting at the store. You choose the best panel for the front. You hide the weak place in a facing. You piece the skirt where the print can disguise the join. You save the sound corner for a pocket. Then you finish the seams well because the garment has to survive wash day. That is design under a real limit. It is also why the mills wanted the sewer's approval. The person feeding the flock might carry the sack, but the person planning the children's clothes could influence which brand the household chose. A pretty repeat that matched 2 sacks already at home had value. So did cloth that did not fade badly. So did a label that came off cleanly. After the war, sewing contests made that value public. State fairs and national promotions rewarded dresses and household pieces made from cotton bags. A Smithsonian dress records Dorothy Overall's success in a 1959 cotton bag sewing contest. Another Smithsonian object notes that her prize included a Hollywood trip. By then, feed sack sewing was not merely an invisible household expedient. Industry had turned the homemaker's second use into advertising, competition, and sales. There is a sharp little lesson there. Resourceful women changed the package. Then the package was marketed back to them. Cotton sacks gradually lost ground to paper packaging, and by the 1960s, the familiar practice was fading. The cloth went away, but the household test behind it did not. Here is the old test in plain form. First, judge the material, not the label. A worn linen tablecloth, a sound cotton curtain, or a clean second-hand sheet may hold more useful yardage than a small new craft cut. Second, know what touched it. Do not reclaim cloth with unknown chemical exposure, mildew, pest contamination, or an odor that washing cannot remove. Old Thrift always began with close inspection. Third, wash before you plan. Cleaning tells you whether the color runs, the cloth shrinks, a stain remains, or a weak place opens. Better to learn that before the scissors come out. Fourth, measure the sound cloth. Do not count a torn edge or a thin center as usable yardage. Mark the flaws. Then choose a project that fits what is truly there. Fifth, give the best part the hardest job. Strong cloth belongs at a pocket, a seat, a handle, or a garment front. A faded but sound section may serve as lining. Small pieces can become patches or quilt work. Sixth, let the old shape teach the new pattern. Work with the width you have. A center seam, a yoke, a contrasting facing, or a pieced pocket can look intentional when it answers the material instead of fighting it. And seventh, stop when the material is spent. Thrift is not an obligation to keep every scrap forever. If a piece has no safe and sensible next use, it has finished its work. That is what I would carry forward from feed sack sewing. Not the hardship, not the notion that women ought to make beauty from too little and never tire. The inheritance is a trained eye. An empty sack came through the door as packaging. Somebody washed it, opened it, turned it, matched it, cut it, and gave it a second name: curtain, apron, shirt, quilt, Sunday dress. The object did not change because it was old-fashioned. It changed because a capable person looked at it long enough to see material where everybody else saw the end of a purchase. If your family kept a feed sack quilt, dress, towel, or even a story about one, tell me what you remember in the comments. And look closely before you do. A row of old stitch holes or the ghost of a mill name may still be waiting there. Until next time, keep what is sound, use what is useful, and let the rest go in peace.